And we have breaking news tonight from the embassy staffer in Ukraine who overheard the president's phone call with Ambassador Gordon Sondland. And that's David Holmes, who testified behind closed doors late today. According to a transcript obtained by CNN, Holmes said that during that call, quote, "I heard President Trump ask, so he's going to do the investigation?" Referring to President Zelensky. Ambassador Sondland replied that he's going to do it, adding that President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to. Well, Holmes testified that after the call, he asked Sondland about the president's views on Ukraine. Quote, Ambassador Sondland stated that the president only cares about big stuff. I noted that there was the big stuff going on in Ukraine, like a war with Russia. And Ambassador Sondland replied that he meant big stuff that benefits the president, like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing. I'm joined by U.S. Congressman Denny Heck, Democrat from Washington, who's a member of the House Intelligence Committee, Jerry B. Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and the Department of Defense, Barbara McQuade, former U.S. attorney, and Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large of The Bulwark. Congressman Heck, let's go to the latest news just breaking right now. David Holmes is testifying behind closed doors in the SCIF, as you know, saying in his opening statement that the president did show his intense interest in getting dirt on Joe Biden and showed he cared a lot more about that than U.S. policy towards Ukraine. Sir, what's it mean?
Well, that was the mini bombshell that was introduced by Ambassador Taylor on Wednesday. The fuse was lit then. The bomb went off today, but it wasn't the only bomb that went off. First of all, we had the hearing with Ambassador Yovanovitch, in which she presented herself as we knew she would, as the consummate professional and career Foreign Service diplomat, and was incredibly a credible witness. And then secondly, of course, across town, Roger Stone is getting convicted on all 7 counts brought against him, including lying to Congress. And in the midst and betwixt and between, as my mom used to say, all of that, the president insisted on continuing his cruelty toward Ambassador Yovanovitch by some form of witness intimidation in real time during the hearing. So there were lots of things that happened today of significance.
Well, let's put them in 2 categories. One would be abuse of power. The president's using his office to get dirt and U.S. foreign aid, military aid to a foreign power, and an ally of ours, using that as leverage to get dirt on an opponent. And then there's this obstruction of Congress part, which you mentioned there. Are we looking at 2 articles of impeachment being formed before our eyes?
Well, it remains to be seen, but those are good nominees for that. Look, today was another significant brick on the load, but, you know, that load has gotten so heavy that the shock absorbers gave out and the tires went flat a long time ago in terms of the evidence against the president for the fact that he did it. He did it.
Let me go to Jeremy Bash. The Congressman, hang in there. Jeremy Bash, let's talk about this conversation now overheard by at least 1 witness, probably 2, that Donald Trump, a day after he talked to Zelensky, the new president of Ukraine, basically trying to get from him, bilking from him, dirt on an opponent, at least a declaration of one. Now we find out that the conversation he had with Sondland, his envoy basically over there, his guy doing the dirty work for him, that the president was once again saying, this is what I care about. I want the dirt on Biden. I don't care about Ukraine.
That's right, Chris. And in fact, this is direct evidence, contrary to all the claims that this is mere hearsay or secondhand information. This is new direct evidence that a senior State Department professional career official heard the president's own voice. He heard the president say that he wanted to present an ultimatum to Zelensky, that Zelensky must investigate Trump's political rival. And essentially, if not, there would be consequences to the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. So a lot of people want to say that no one has heard the president, no one has met the president. This is new evidence that, in fact, someone has heard the president say it directly, and it echoes precisely what the president said the day before in that July 25th phone call, for which we now have the transcript.
Let's talk about the law and impeachment and the language thereof. Barbara, I want to ask you 2 questions. One, the president showed today he's willing to intimidate a witness. The chair of the Intel Committee said basically that's witness tampering. It sounds like he's developing from that something of an abuse of Congress, rather obstruction of Congress charge. And then, of course, we have the president now verified that Donald Trump on the phone, on a cell phone line, an open phone, to a guy sitting in a restaurant in Kiev, in Ukraine, chatting with him about how he's going to nail this deal where he's going to get the dirt from the new president of Ukraine. All on the record now, all verified by ear witnesses, people actually listening to the conversation. Are we looking at two articles of impeachment here? It seems to me they are: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Your thoughts?
I think you could very well charge both of those, Chris. I mean, first, the intimidation. I think President Trump tries to show that there's nothing criminal about his behavior by doing it so openly and notoriously. But he is really just daring somebody to stand up to him and say, that is not okay, that is criminal. Of course, in the impeachment context, it doesn't even have to be a crime, just some abuse of power. But this overlaps. It's an abuse of power and it is criminal. In the criminal context, doing something to intimidate a witness is a crime, and it also has the tendency to chill the testimony of other witnesses who may come forward or who would be thinking about coming forward with information.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.